Welcome to the Irish Revolution. Last month we talked about the murder of the Lord Mayor of Cork as well as the cause of Southern Unionists. This month we're going to look at an operation against a British spy. We'll also talk about the hunger strikes that broke out this month in prison. The prisoners who had been swooped up in the army and police raids in 1920 had gone on hunger strike in Mountjoy prison, demanding recognition of their political status. The initial reaction from Dublin Castle was hardline, but popular support was very much on the side of the hunger strikers, and following a brief general strike as well as a protest in an English prison, Wormwood Scrubs, the government backed down. The initial plan was to parole the unconvicted prisoners, but due to an insane level of incompetence, all of the prisoners were released in error. Apparently the mistake was made when the prisoners were taken outside the prison for medical treatment. This has to be the single greatest bureaucratic beep up in Irish history. This absurd affair directly led to a very critical report of the Dublin Castle administration and greatly weakened the morale of Crown forces. Hunger striking as a tactic was used 300 times in 1919 in various prisons across the country. The authorities responded by moving men along to different prisons, thinking they'd dilute the prisoners' leadership. This didn't work out as they may have hoped. The strikes escalated in 1920, in particular this month, and later the rolling strike would be introduced where people would strike for relatively short periods and pass the baton on to another group. Were the strikes successful? Undoubtedly the Mountjoy strike was. Also, from a propagandistic perspective, it was invaluable. But in general, the strikes failed to improve material conditions in prisons, which was also one of their aims, besides the aspiration to be treated as political prisoners. The British didn't really know what the best course of action was, and the tactic did seem to unnerve them. A previous hunger strike in 1917 led to prison staff force-feeding 40 prisoners. This caused the death of Thomas Ashe, an Easter Rising hero and early Republican martyr following 1916. In the summer of 1920, the hunger strike of Terence MacSweeney, the Lord Mayor of Cork, gripped the nation and to a certain extent caught the attention of the international press. We'll talk about that at a later date. Now, moving on, there were a lot of shootings this month of RIC men ranging from County Kerry, Cork, Clare, Tipperary, Louth, Dublin, Galway and possibly more. The violence is clearly escalating and everywhere. I don't want each episode to be a compendium of the shootings. I want to respect all the people who died, of course. But I intend to try and focus more on the broader themes that emerge from this. Let's take a look at one British spy, John Charles Byrne, otherwise known as John Jameson. He was actually shot in March, but, well, whatever. During a police strike in London, Michael Collins sent over a man to make what he thought might be useful contacts. While that man was in London, he met Jameson, who had been posing as a Marxist sympathiser while secretly working for MI6. He turned up in Dublin shortly afterwards bearing a letter of introduction from Art O'Brien, Sinn Féin's man on the ground in Britain. He described himself as a revolutionary who wanted to harm Britain and offered to supply weapons. Redmond met with Collins and Richard Mulcahy, the IRA Chief of Staff, at least 2 times. Having got into their good graces, he organised to have Collins lifted at a third meeting at the home of Bat O'Connor on 16th of January 1920. Collins had a lucky escape that night as the operation was botched. RIC Inspector Redmond was attempting to rejuvenate the G-Spy division of the Dublin Metropolitan Police at this time, before his assassination in January 1920. Before his death, however, he gave Jameson up, without realising it. Reacting to grumbling complaints from his G-Division officers, he responded angrily with, quote, "Not one of you has been able to get onto Collins' track for a month, and there is a man only 2 days in Dublin and has already seen him," unquote. The detective he was haranguing complained about this to Ned Bry, a double agent within the G-Spy division, who promptly told Michael Collins. Since Jameson was a new arrival, he was obviously under immediate suspicion. Collins then wrote to Art O'Brien, the Sinn Féin man in London, saying that he had reason to suspect Jameson. By the way, Redmond would meet his end around this time too, Collins having decided that he was far too dangerous and accepting his outburst to Bry, far too competent to leave in place. Jameson later returned to Dublin with a case of pistols, claiming to have sourced them from communist agents in Britain. The squad, the unit of Dublin IRA assassins committed to fighting the intelligence war in the capital, laid something of a trap for Jameson, telling their mole in Dublin Castle to keep an eye out for any upcoming raids. Sure enough, news filtered through around midday that they were preparing a raid of number 56 Bachelor's Walk, just where they had told Jameson to meet them. Watching from across the river, some members of the squad were able to see the raid take place. Of course, the Crown forces found nothing. They returned the next day to dig up the basement. Oh, by the way, if you're really interested in this stuff, check out Ryle Dwyer's book on the squad. He was shot soon after, and the squad discovered all kinds of incriminating documents on his person. The First Lord of the Admiralty, Walter Long, stated that Jameson, whose real name was Byrne, was the best Secret Service man they had. Just finishing up here now, this is going to be a quick one this month. There was a raid in County Limerick on an RIC barracks in Ballylanders. Around the same time, the Black and Tans went on the rampage in Limerick City, one of the many times in which small-scale acts of drunken brutality would sour the local population against them. Also this month, hundreds of local police stations that had been abandoned by the RIC were burnt down across the country. The trend was now clear for the rest of the conflict. The RIC, their numbers augmented by the arrival of the Black and Tans, were suffering more and more casualties from isolated gunmen across the nation, adding fear and despondency. The government proved itself to be incompetent and lacking strategy, the egregious example of the Mountjoy prisoner releases being a particularly ridiculous example. The Black and Tans were getting into their stride and reprisals becoming more common. In an awful case of history repeating itself, riots erupted in Derry with terrible scenes of street fighting, police bayonet charges against Catholic civilians, and Ulster volunteer forces shooting into Catholic areas. The war was hotting up. Okay folks, thanks so much for watching. No biographies this month. If you fancy it, think about throwing a few bob into me wee tip jar there. There's a link in the description. Thanks a lot. Now, good luck. Bye.